In the gentle light of early dawn, the suburban streets of the northeastern state exude an almost ritualistic calm. I awaken in a modest house that has become both sanctuary and cell, a place where every morning echoes with routine and quiet resignation. As the first rays of sun filter through lace curtains, I rise slowly, carrying with me the weight of yesterday and an unspoken dread of today. The air in the small, familiar kitchen feels cool and slightly stale, as if it mirrors the subtle changes that have crept into my life. I prepare a cup of tea with measured movements that have long since turned mechanical, each step a reminder of the comfort and monotony of domesticity. Outside, the neighborhood stirs to life in hushed whispers, yet within these walls, time seems to contract, holding me captive to memories and uncertainties. My husband, Brandon, leaves before the first blush of dawn, his departure marked by the soft click of the door rather than a farewell. The silence he leaves behind is not entirely empty, but it is filled with a palpable absence, a void that grows with each passing day. While he embarks on his daily journey into the world, I remain, immersed in the solitude of our shared life. The tasks of maintaining our home, once a source of solace, now feel like an endless list of obligations, stripping away the vibrancy of existence. As I move through the familiar spaces of our home, the remnants of better days linger in every corner. Photographs that capture moments of laughter and warmth, and mementos that speak of dreams once fervently pursued. But now these tokens evoke more melancholy than joy. The internal dialogue that accompanies these reflections is relentless. A quiet conversation with myself about what once was and what has been irrevocably lost. The routine itself, so carefully constructed over the years, begins to feel like a series of locked doors, each one concealing layers of unspoken sorrow and discontent. There is an unyielding stillness that accompanies these mornings, a reminder that beneath the surface of ordinary life lies a profound sense of emptiness. It is in these solitary hours that the realization strikes most painfully. The life I live, though outwardly stable, is slowly unraveling from within. In the quiet of the suburban morning, with the world still half asleep, I stand on the precipice of an uncertain day. A day that promises to challenge the very foundations of my existence. Every step I take, every ritual performed, echoes with the silent question of whether this carefully maintained facade can continue to hide the truth of my inner turmoil. As the day unfolds, I find myself adrift in a labyrinth of thoughts that weigh heavily on my soul. Within the quiet confines of our home, I wander from room to room, each step echoing the loss of a vibrancy that once defined me. The very walls seem to murmur memories of laughter and shared dreams, now obscured by the creeping tendrils of isolation. Every morning I wake with a sense of duty, yet as the hours slip by, a profound emptiness swallows me whole. In the solitude of the early light, my mind drifts into a realm of recollection, revisiting moments when my heart brimmed with hope and excitement. I remember the times when every corner of our small house was filled with the energy of new possibilities, when the future sparkled with promise. Now, those days feel like distant echoes, barely audible under the weight of a daily routine that leaves me questioning who I have become. In the silence, I scrutinize my inner world, a landscape marked by subtle, yet unmistakable decay. It is as though a slow, relentless erosion has taken place. The gentle persistence of time has worn down the once bright colors of my emotions, leaving behind a muted palette of regret and resignation. I sit by the window, watching the interplay of shadows and light dance on the pavement outside, each movement a reminder of the transient nature of happiness. The contrast between the bustling world beyond and the hollow quiet of my interior is jarring. Within me, there is a constant dialogue. Fragments of cherished memories clash with the cold clarity of my current reality. I recall the tender exchanges and soft words that once adorned our conversations, now replaced by a staccato rhythm of routine and obligation. The very thought of what has been lost gnaws at me. A quiet mourning for the person I used to be, and the love that once seemed boundless. I question whether the warmth I once felt was ever truly mine or merely a fragile illusion that shattered under the weight of life's relentless march. In these reflective hours, I begin to sense that something essential has been quietly stripped away, leaving behind a void that I can neither fill nor ignore. It is not merely a longing for past joy, but a deep-seated realization that the core of my being has been altered irreversibly. Even as the day progresses and mundane tasks beckon, this inner emptiness remains a silent, persistent companion, shadowing each movement and thought. The contrast between the external calm and the inner tumult is stark, a reminder that beneath the surface of ordinary life, a profound change is taking shape, one that challenges the very foundations of who I am. Brandon's presence in our home has become an echo of a time when every gesture held a quiet promise of care and connection. Mornings now begin with his soft, distant smile, a greeting that once filled me with reassurance, but now leaves me with a lingering chill. As he departs each day with a nod and a few polite words, an invisible line seems to widen between us, marking the slow disintegration of a bond we once took for granted. In the hushed aftermath of his departure, I find myself replaying the memories of the man he used to be. There was a time when every exchange between us resonated with unspoken understanding, when the slightest touch or shared glance was enough to convey volumes of affection. Now, however, our conversations have shrunk into a collection of mundane phrases and obligatory pleasantries. The warmth that once animated our dialogues has given way to a formality that feels both foreign and unsettling. During the long, quiet evenings that follow his return, we settle into our habitual routines like two actors reciting lines from a well-worn script. The table, once a place of shared laughter and heartfelt discussions, now serves as the silent stage for our disengaged interactions. Brandon's eyes, which once sparkled with lively curiosity, now seem guarded, watchful yet detached, while I struggle to bridge the growing distance with words that feel increasingly hollow. His voice, though still calm and even, carries a timbre of indifference that seeps into every corner of our home. I search for traces of the man I fell in love with, hoping to catch a glimpse of his former warmth in the casual tilt of his head or the softening of his gaze. Instead, I encounter only the cold reality of a man who has retreated behind a wall of routine and unexpressed emotions. Every shared meal, every brief encounter in the living room reinforces the realization that our life together has transformed into a series of well-rehearsed gestures devoid of genuine connection. The silence that follows our small talk is not peaceful. It is a quiet reminder of the distance that now defines our relationship. In these moments of reflection, I cannot help but wonder when the shift occurred. Was it the gradual accumulation of unsaid words and unaddressed disappointments? Or was it a single, unremarkable day when the spark between us quietly extinguished? The uncertainty of it gnaws at me, leaving me to sift through the fragments of our shared past in search of clues. Yet, each attempt only seems to underline the undeniable truth. The intimacy we once cherished has faded into something unrecognizable, a relic of a bygone era that continues to haunt the corners of my heart. That evening, a decision both impulsive and necessary led me away from the familiar solitude of my home and into a realm of color and possibility. I signed up for a painting class at a modest community center in Boston, a small haven of creativity tucked away in a lively quarter of the city. The center buzzed with quiet chatter and the soft rustle of easels being arranged. It was a stark contrast to the muted routine of my daily existence, and as I stepped inside, I felt a hesitant excitement stirring beneath layers of apprehension. The room was awash with a gentle glow from scattered lamps and the diffuse light filtering through large, unadorned windows. Each workstation was a small island of potential, with canvases waiting patiently for the first brushstrokes of an artist's vision. I found a vacant spot near a window, the soft hum of creative energy filling the space as instructors offered quiet guidance. I set up my palette and brushes, my mind a quiet whirlwind of memories and latent hope. It was in this charged atmosphere of creative vulnerability that I first noticed him, Tyler. He had an unassuming presence, his eyes reflecting a warmth and quiet curiosity that seemed to search for meaning beyond the surface. Tyler's smile, subtle and genuine, broke through the formal stiffness of the initial introductions, drawing me in with a silent invitation to converse. As we dipped our brushes into the vibrant hues before us, our conversation began with light observations about the play of light on the canvases, soon blossoming into an exchange of personal insights. We spoke of books that had shaped us, music that had soothed our wounded hearts, and dreams that whispered of a life less ordinary. Tyler's words were thoughtful and sincere, and in the quiet intervals between painting techniques and color mixing, his attentive gaze made me feel acknowledged in a way I had not experienced in a long time. The conversation was refreshing, an unforced communion of ideas that left no room for superficiality. With every shared smile and gentle nod, I sensed that behind his calm exterior lay a depth of character that resonated with my own concealed struggles. His perspectives, simple yet profound, hinted at an inner world where art and emotion intertwined seamlessly. The evening stretched on as our canvases began to reveal tentative stories of our own. The muted strokes and tentative splashes of color paralleled the cautious unfolding of our dialogue, each mark a testament to our unspoken hopes. I found myself drawn to the authenticity in Tyler's manner, a man who seemed unburdened by the pretense of everyday routines, and who valued genuine connection over polite formality. For the first time in what felt like ages, I experienced a spark of something unexpected, the promise of discovery not only in art, but in the possibility of a deeper human connection. The creative space transformed into a quiet sanctuary where, for a fleeting moment, the heaviness of my life seemed to lift, replaced by a gentle curiosity about who I might become if I dared to embrace these uncharted emotions. In the soft murmur of shared thoughts and the quiet clinking of brushes against glass jars, I began to see that sometimes stepping out of the familiar was the only way to awaken a slumbering soul. After the final strokes of color had dried on our canvases, the classroom's ambient hum seemed to fade into the background. In a quiet corner near the window, where the gentle glow of twilight mingled with the soft clatter of packing supplies, Tyler and I found ourselves lingering far beyond the usual farewell. The lingering presence of shared creativity invited us to exchange words that had long remained unsaid, a conversation that unfolded naturally, as if every word had been waiting patiently in the silence of our hearts. Tyler's voice, steady and sincere, broke the lingering quiet with a simple question. What is it that you truly seek in moments like these? The inquiry, free from judgment and wrapped in genuine curiosity, coaxed forth thoughts I had long buried beneath layers of daily routine. I hesitated only a moment before sharing a reflection of my inner landscape, a candid confession of feeling detached from a life that once brimmed with promise. I spoke of mornings filled with a mechanical preparation, of evenings that slipped away in silence, and of a profound internal disquiet that had slowly replaced what once was a sense of belonging. The air between us grew thick with unspoken understanding as Tyler listened intently, his eyes never wavering from mine. It was as if he had discovered a secret language in the pauses between my words, a language that spoke of past joys, lost dreams, and the weight of unexpressed regrets. In his gentle nods and thoughtful expressions, I sensed that he too carried fragments of unfulfilled aspirations and quiet disappointments. His own story, hinted at through subtle remarks and measured sighs, resonated with the sentiment that life sometimes unfolds in unexpected ways, leaving us both adrift and yet yearning for authenticity. Our dialogue moved from the surface to deeper, more personal territories. We discussed books that had once set our imaginations aflame, the soothing strains of melodies that had accompanied us through darker times, and the dreams that had quietly flickered in the recesses of our minds. With each exchange, the conversation became less about filling the silence and more about exploring the parts of ourselves that had been neglected. The conversation was never forced. It was an organic meeting of hearts and minds that gently dismantled the barriers built over years of unchallenged routine. In that softly lit corner of the art center, every word we spoke felt like an invitation to rediscover the parts of us that had been long forgotten. There was a delicate power in simply being heard, of knowing that someone cared enough to listen without preconceptions. The sincerity in our dialogue, stripped of any pretense, set the stage for something transformative. As we continued speaking, the canvas of my inner world began to reveal long-suppressed colors, hinting at the possibility that perhaps this moment of unguarded truth was the first step toward a path where genuine connection could once again illuminate the shadows of an otherwise routine existence. That evening, after the art class had concluded and our conversation still reverberated softly in my mind, the sky began to shift in tone. The early dusk, which had held its quiet promise, suddenly darkened as clouds gathered overhead. Tyler and I stepped out into the cool air, our parting from the center marked by a shared understanding that something unseen was stirring. As we walked together along the familiar streets, a light drizzle began to fall. Small, deliberate drops that whispered secrets as they touched the pavement. At first, the rain felt like a mere inconvenience, a minor interruption to our journey. But as the droplets gathered into a gentle, persistent shower, we instinctively sought shelter beneath the modest awning of a nearby cafe. The narrow refuge offered only a glimpse of the storm beyond, where the world was momentarily washed clean by nature's quiet intervention. Standing side by side in that small, shared space, the ambient murmur of the rain created a cocoon of solitude around us. The usual clamor of everyday worries was muted, replaced by a tender calm that neither of us had anticipated. For a few moments, we stood in companionable silence, our eyes occasionally meeting in a mutual acknowledgement of the unspoken significance of the situation. It was as if the rain had provided a gentle permission to set aside the routine and facades that had so long defined my daily existence. Tyler's hand, resting near mine, shifted ever so slightly until our fingers brushed. A contact so subtle yet profoundly affirming that it bridged the unspoken gap between isolation and connection. In that suspended moment, when the world outside blurred into a soft watercolor of greens and grays, we found ourselves drawn closer by a shared vulnerability. Our conversation, which moments before had been filled with reflective insights, tapered off into an intimate silence that needed no words. The rain's steady rhythm served as a soft accompaniment to the swell of feelings quietly stirring between us. Then, with a gentle deliberateness, we leaned towards one another. The act was neither rushed nor dramatic. It unfolded naturally, as if it had always been destined to occur in that precise moment. Our lips met in a brief, sincere kiss, a silent affirmation of a connection that had grown steadily in the warmth of shared understanding and unspoken truths. The kiss was marked by a delicate tenderness, a simple expression of the new feelings that had begun to challenge the routines and the quiet despair that had settled in my life. As we slowly pulled away, the rain continued to fall, its soft cadence echoing the purity of that moment. The kiss, fleeting yet significant, left behind an indelible impression, a spark of hope amidst the lingering questions of my heart. In that transient embrace, I sensed that perhaps the world was capable of offering unexpected chapters, where even in the midst of familiar routines and subdued routines, there could be a quiet invitation to embrace life anew. In the weeks that followed that defining evening, a subtle yet profound transformation began to weave its way into my daily life. The aftermath of that brief, sincere kiss lingered not as an isolated moment, but as a quiet promise of change, a secret that seemed to whisper of untold possibilities. In the gentle interplay between daylight and shadow, Tyler and I found ourselves drawn together repeatedly, seeking refuge in brief encounters that spoke volumes without the need for elaborate declarations. Our meetings, discreet and unplanned, took place in the soft corners of the city where anonymity allowed us to explore the new contours of our relationship without the heavy gaze of familiar routines. We gravitated towards secluded cafes with weathered wooden tables and dimmed lights that cocooned our conversations from prying ears. Here, amidst the low murmur of other patrons and the rhythmic tapping of rain against windows, we discovered a language of subtle expressions, a series of glances and half-smiles that needed no translation. Each encounter felt like a shared secret, a gentle defiance of the predictable roles we had long been forced to inhabit. Tyler's presence was steady and unobtrusive, a constant reminder of a world beyond the mundane tasks that had come to define my existence. He spoke with a quiet conviction about the books he read, the small joys of everyday life, and the dreams that sometimes seemed too fragile to mention aloud. His words were deliberate and measured, each sentence a brushstroke that painted an image of a life where emotional connection was not only possible, but deeply nourishing. For my part, I found myself opening up in ways that felt both exhilarating and unnerving. The careful lines of my daily routine began to blur at the edges as I allowed myself to embrace these new moments of vulnerability. In our secret conversations, I shared recollections of childhood wonder and the quiet aspirations that had been tucked away over the years. It was as if, in the presence of someone who genuinely listened, the layers of hesitation that had long encased my heart began to dissolve. These clandestine meetings were not overt acts of rebellion, but rather gentle nudges toward reclaiming a part of me that had been silent for too long. Every shared laugh, every thoughtful pause as we contemplated the simplicity of a shared memory, helped to build a space where authenticity could flourish. We spoke not just of our current predicaments, but also of our hopes for a future unburdened by the constraints of a routine that had become too familiar to challenge. Yet, even as these secret dialogues unfolded, the weight of reality loomed in the background. I was acutely aware of the delicate balance I maintained between the life I had known and the new emotions stirring within me. Every encounter was a step taken in a narrow corridor between duty and desire, between the comfort of the known and the uncertain promise of change. In that in-between space, our conversations became an anchor, a subtle reminder that even in the quiet corners of life, there existed the possibility of renewal, and with it, the courage to face what lay ahead. Returning home after one of our secret meetings, I found the atmosphere in our house strangely altered, as if the familiar walls had absorbed the quiet secrets of the day. The light that once filled the rooms now carried a heavier, more contemplative tone. Even the ticking of the old clock in the hallway seemed to echo a forewarning, a subtle reminder that things, both inside and out, were shifting in ways I could no longer ignore. Upon entering the living room, I noticed that the arrangement of everyday objects had been disturbed ever so slightly, as if the passage of time and the silent confessions of the day had left their mark. There was an uncharacteristic restlessness in the air, a pause that seemed to capture both anticipation and a trace of apprehension. Brandon sat in his usual spot by the window, his gaze fixed on something beyond the view, yet his posture told a different story. The familiar ease in his expression had given way to an unreadable look, as if he too sensed that an invisible boundary had been crossed. Our evening rituals, once marked by an unspoken understanding, now carried hints of discord. While I busied myself with routine tasks, folding laundry, setting the table, the silence between us felt laden with the weight of unsaid questions. Brandon's brief, clipped replies to my casual greetings sent small ripples of doubt through me. Each understated gesture and slight shift in tone seemed to accumulate, painting a picture of a man who is becoming increasingly distant or, perhaps, increasingly aware of something amiss. I couldn't help but wonder if these subtle disturbances were reflections of the inner turmoil that had been growing in both of us. Had Brandon sensed the quiet departures from our well-worn paths? Or was it simply the inevitable consequence of days spent apart, where each silent moment echoed the emptiness that had crept into our shared life? In the stillness of our home, every glance and measured word began to take on a dual meaning, a silent inquiry into the nature of our changed relationship. As I moved through the house, lingering in the spaces where intimacy once resided, I felt a persistent tug at my conscience. There was a tangible shift, a discrete series of signals that suggested my secret meetings and quiet revelations were no longer confined solely to the hidden corners of my day. The shadow of those stolen moments with Tyler had begun to stretch into the heart of our domestic life, casting doubts that neither Brandon nor I could easily dismiss. In that quiet solitude, as night drew its curtain over the day's unspoken confessions, I realized that the fault lines in our home were widening. The familiar routine was now interlaced with the murmurs of suspicion, a delicate interplay of glances and half-formed questions. The unsettling quiet was a prelude to a deeper reckoning, one that promised to challenge the very foundations of the life we had built together. The tension that had been quietly simmering at home finally found its outlet on an evening that began like any other. As twilight deepened outside our windows, an unspoken gravity filled the living room, the silence charged with more than just the hum of the refrigerator or the soft ticking of the clock. That night, The air between Brandon and me was heavy with anticipation. Each small movement, each subtle glance, laden with the promise of an imminent reckoning. Brandon's earlier reticence had grown into something more pointed by the time we sat down for dinner. The meal, a ritual once imbued with familiar warmth, now unfolded as a cautious dance of measured words and avoided topics. I could sense in his eyes a search for truth, as if he were piecing together fragments of a puzzle that had long eluded him. Every clink of cutlery, every pause before a reply seemed to echo the quiet storm that raged beneath our calm exterior. As the minutes stretched on, the silence became too weighty to ignore. Brandon cleared his throat and, in a voice that was neither harsh nor accusatory, began to question the shifts in our daily interactions. He spoke of subtle changes, a softening in my tone during the morning routines, a hesitancy that betrayed the self-assuredness of years past, and a lingering distraction that hinted at secrets carefully guarded. With each word, I felt the old familiarity of our shared past clash with the stark reality of our present, the distance between us widening in the space where intimacy used to reside. I listened, heart pounding as he recounted the moments that had troubled him, the altered rhythm of our conversations, the quiet hesitations in my eyes, and the strange, fleeting glances toward the door whenever I thought he wasn't watching. It was as if he had been quietly assembling the mosaic of our disjointed life, each piece a small clue to the bigger picture. My own emotions surged, a mixture of regret, sorrow, and the undeniable pull of something new that had awakened within me, yet now threatened to unravel the fragile bonds of the life we had built. The conversation reached a delicate impasse when, after a long pause, I finally found my voice. I spoke of the emptiness that had crept into my days, the longing for a connection that had somehow been buried under the weight of unspoken routine. I confessed that I had sought solace in unexpected places, that in moments of profound isolation I had allowed my heart to wander toward the promise of understanding and genuine companionship. Every word felt like stepping onto a tightrope, suspended between remorse for the betrayal and the desperate need for self-discovery. Brandon's eyes searched mine, a mixture of hurt and quiet resolve etched in his gaze. In that charged silence, we both understood that this was a turning point, a moment where the comfortable lies of routine were forced to confront the painful truths of our altered realities. The air, thick with unshed tears and unspoken apologies, bore witness to the raw confrontation of two souls standing at the crossroads of memory and the uncertain promise of tomorrow. That night, after the long confrontation in our living room, a heavy silence settled over our once familiar home. The soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant ticking of the clock filled the void as Brandon and I sat across from one another at our dining table. An arena that had long witnessed our shared joys and quiet routines, now transformed into a stage for raw honesty. The air was thick with the weight of unsaid words and the gravity of an impending confession, as if every object in the room bore witness to the turning point in our lives. I could feel my heart pounding with an urgency that belied the calm in my voice, and as the dim light of a solitary lamp cast elongated shadows across the table, I began to unravel the tangled story of my inner world. I told Brandon about the hollow days that had eroded my once bright spirit, about the mornings that unfolded like rehearsed lines, each one stripping away a piece of the life I thought I knew. I described how the quiet emptiness in our home became unbearable, a silence that begged to be filled with something genuine, something that spoke to the parts of me that had long lain dormant. With each word, I exposed the vulnerabilities I had hidden for so many years. I confessed that, in moments of piercing solitude, I had sought refuge in the unexpected company of Tyler, a friend who had reignited the spark of conversation and reminded me of the beauty of being truly seen. My voice wavered as I recounted the clandestine meetings, the soft exchanges of thoughts and feelings that contrasted so starkly with the numbing predictability of my everyday life. The weight of that admission, long held in secret, finally pressed upon me, and I spoke it aloud with a mixture of sorrow and reluctant liberation. Brandon's eyes filled with a tumult of emotions, hurt, disbelief, and a deep, lingering sadness, met mine as he listened intently. His silence was profound, a response as piercing as any words could be. In that fragile moment, the room held the raw intensity of unspoken truth, and I sensed that the life we had built together was irreversibly altered by the revelations that now lay bare before us. I acknowledged the betrayal implicit in my actions, not as an excuse, but as a desperate reach for a connection that had vanished amid the monotony of our shared existence. My confession was not a plea for forgiveness, but rather a recognition of a truth that demanded to be seen, even if it shattered the illusions of what we had once believed to be an unassailable bond. The table, the lamp, the very walls of our home seemed to lean in, urging honesty and offering no comfort for the transgressions of the past. In that quiet hour, as the night deepened and shadows mingled with the light, the conversation unfolded as an irreversible admission of change. It was a moment when the carefully constructed facade of our routine crumbled, leaving only the stark reality of two lives that had reached a crossroads. And as I sat there, my heart heavy with regret and hope intertwined, I knew that the road ahead would demand choices that would redefine not only our future together, but also the very essence of who I had become. In the days that followed our heart-wrenching confession, our home was permeated with a palpable stillness, a silence that carried the weight of irrevocable change. Every familiar corner, once steeped in shared memories, now whispered stories of regret and possibility. The quiet that had come to define our life together transformed into a canvas painted with the stark reality of consequences. Brandon's steady, measured presence and my own trembling uncertainty converged in moments of reflective solitude as we both grappled with the aftermath of truths finally revealed. Brandon, his face etched with sorrow and determination, retreated into himself. He moved about the house with a deliberate calm, his eyes often fixed on a distant horizon that promised a future reshaped by choices neither of us had anticipated. His silence, while painful, was also a testament to the resilience he possessed, a quiet resolve to either rebuild from the fractured remains of our past or chart a new course entirely. I watched him navigate our altered world with the dignity of someone who had tasted loss and understood that the first step toward healing lay in accepting the rawness of the present. For my part, I embarked on a journey of self-discovery with hesitant steps. The confession had stripped away many of the pretense layers that had long masked the inner void, leaving me exposed to both my regrets and my unrealized hopes. In the lonely hours after our conversation, I found solace in wandering the quiet streets of our neighborhood, allowing the rhythmic cadence of my footsteps to guide me toward moments of introspection. I began to see that the act of speaking my truth, no matter how painful, had ignited a spark within me, one that urged me to confront the possibility of renewal. This inner shift compelled me to reconsider the life I had once accepted without question. The secret meetings, the whispered conversations with Tyler, had not merely been acts of defiance against a life that had grown too predictable. They had also served as catalysts, stirring the parts of me that had long been dormant. As I sifted through memories of both joy and sorrow, I realized that this period of upheaval was a necessary prelude to forging a path that honored my true self. It was a difficult reckoning, one that demanded I confront the pain of betrayal and the uncertainty of a future unmoored from what I once knew. In the midst of this personal storm, the prospect of a new beginning emerged, fragile and uncharted. The choices before me were daunting, as the familiar comfort of our past life now lay in stark contrast to the raw potential of a different way of being. Whether it meant repairing the bonds that had once tied us together or venturing down a separate path toward individual fulfillment, the road ahead was irrevocably altered. With each passing day, the tension between holding on and letting go slowly resolved into a cautious acceptance that the truth, as painful as it was, held the key to rediscovering the parts of me that had been long lost. And so, in the quiet aftermath of revelations and regrets, a new chapter began to take shape, one where the lessons of the past intertwined with the promise of an uncharted future. The journey would not be easy, but within that uncertainty lay the possibility of genuine renewal, a chance to rebuild a life anchored not in routine, but in authenticity, and the courage to embrace every fragile, beautiful truth.